The Russo-Ukrainian war, counted from the start of Russia's full-scale invasion, has now lasted longer than the fighting of the First World War. And although recent months have brought clear signs of stabilization along many sectors of the front, the war has not burned out. Russia continues to apply pressure on selected axes, while Ukrainian forces are trying to regain the initiative elsewhere, recording a series of tactical successes. Today we will look at the most important developments across the main directions of the front, visualize them on the map, and pay particular attention to the key changes in how this war has been fought in recent months. In the background, Ukraine's long-range strike campaign also continues. Let's dive in. Recent media reports have suggested that the situation on the front is beginning to change after many months of full Russian initiative, and that Ukraine has achieved significant successes. Let's look at this in more detail, because as usual, the reality is more nuanced. Contrary to widespread expectations, Russia did not launch a new spring offensive on the scale of operations seen over the previous 2 years. Instead, between March and April, activity on the front almost froze, with Russian forces conducting only limited offensive operations. This did not change much in the second half of April and in early May, when Russia focused mainly on Kostiantynivka direction, which it had already approached at the end of last year, and on the area west of Huliaipole. Ukraine, meanwhile, launched a series of counterattacks in February and March, concentrating on stabilizing and improving its position at the junction of Dnipropetrovsk and Zaporozhye oblasts, striking toward Uspenivka. Although Ukraine failed to retake the village itself, the operation allowed its forces to recover several settlements lost earlier and improve their tactical position ahead of an expected Russian renewal of offensive activity in this sector. In recent months, Ukrainian forces have also counterattacked successfully in the northeastern part of Kherson Oblast, around Stepnohirsk, pushing Russian troops out of the area around the village, including at least its northern and central parts. Ukrainian forces also continued operations to the southeast toward the village of Kamianske, recapturing positions lost earlier. This pushed Russian forces back from Zaporozhye, secured this direction, and erased the gains Russia had made over many months in 2025. The main effect was to drive back Russian FPV drone operators who had posed a threat to the southern districts of Zaporozhye itself. Over the past few weeks, broader Ukrainian activity has also been recorded around Ivanivka and Novopavlivka, resulting in the securing of both villages southwest of Pokrovsk. Further west, Ukrainian operations continued in recent days along a front more than 20 kilometers wide, where we observed a Ukrainian strike toward the village of Komar. So far, visual evidence has confirmed Ukrainian troops reaching Novokrychorivka, Nowocheorchivka, Voskresenka and Pidubne. Ukraine is now operating in much the same model Russia used a year ago. We are seeing an effective tactic of penetration and infiltration by individual soldiers through sections of the front line left unmanned by the enemy, combined with logistical problems on the side currently defending this sector. Because this is an infiltration-based tactic, we should be careful to assume that attacking units are actually consolidating control. Areas that appear to have been retaken may, in reality, remain contested. For example, about 2 weeks ago, Russian presence was recorded in Dobropasove. A few days later, Ukrainian presence was recorded in Novokrychorivka, 2 villages more than 20 kilometers apart in a straight line. This most likely means that this area contains an exceptionally wide gray zone, roughly 20 kilometers deep, which is not under effective control by either side. Both Russian and Ukrainian forces are operating through small infiltrating units, trying to seize and hold selected positions. Such wide gray zones are becoming, and will likely continue to become, an increasingly characteristic feature of the Ukrainian front, especially in areas without towns or larger villages. The reason is twofold. Both sides have limited manpower, and drones now dominate the battlefield to such an extent that consolidation has become extremely difficult. In May, with a clear delay compared with previous years, Russia began broader offensive operations on a limited number of axes. At the moment, the two main Russian advances are developing in two directions. The group of forces east resumed its operations east of Huliaipole, which Russia had captured late last year, slowly grinding down Ukrainian defenses and reaching three larger villages, anchoring the first defensive line toward Orychiv, Huliaipilskie, Werchnia Tersa and Wojdyżywka. Along the way, Russian forces also seized a number of smaller villages. Based on available visual material, all three larger villages are currently contested, with the first of them largely under Russian control. The clear Russian objective on this axis is to roll up the Ukrainian defense, which in this area was oriented along a north-south line and reach Orychiv from the east. This matters because countless Russian attempts to break through from the south have ended in failure. Russia is now roughly halfway between Huliaipole and Orychiv, but better prepared Ukrainian defensive positions still lie ahead. Between February and May, Russia also conducted operations west of Sieviersk, captured last year, directly along the Słowiańsk-Kramatorsk axis. Russian forces advanced by roughly 10 kilometers in this area and reached the village of Rai-Oleksandrivka, where fighting is still ongoing. It is doubtful, however, that Russia will attempt a direct assault on the two largest Ukrainian-controlled cities in Donbas. These operations are more likely intended to tie down Ukrainian forces. There is little doubt that Russia's attention in recent months has focused on capturing Kostiantynivka. The Russian operation to take the city has closely mirrored the actions that led to the capture of Pokrovsk and Myrnograd. Initially, Russia concentrated on seizing areas on both flanks of the city's defense. As a result, between February and May, Ukrainian forces were pushed out of Berestok and most of Ilinivka west of the city, as well as Novodmitrivka east of Konstantinivka's build-up area. From these captured villages, Russian forces then began infiltrating Konstantinivka itself. This was carried out by individual soldiers, who then concentrated in larger numbers inside the city before attacking Ukrainian strongpoints. As a result, in late May or early June, Ukrainian defenses in the southwestern part of the city were breached. Russian troops broke through Ukrainian positions from the southern part of Ilinivka and nearby forests, entered the city and quickly reached its central area. This fragmented part of the Ukrainian defense into isolated strongpoints and enabled Russian forces to seize large areas in the western part of the city. The success of Russian assault groups was preceded, as in Pokrovsk, by the neutralization of Ukrainian logistics. The main, and effectively the only, Ukrainian supply route linking Konstantinivka with the rear, the Konstantinivka-Druszkivka road, came under the control of Russian drone operators several weeks ago. The result was the blocking of most movement along the road, forcing Ukrainian troops to move into and out of the city on foot. Ukrainian soldiers themselves admitted that rotating in or reaching the city involved far greater risk than actually remaining inside it. Control over the road not only complicated the supply of the city, but also severely disrupted rotations, the movement of fresh forces, and made the evacuation of wounded almost impossible. At the same time, regular Russian precision strikes with glide bombs against identified Ukrainian defensive positions gradually weakened the defense and enabled assault groups to achieve success. And so the battle for the city is entering its final phase, but that does not mean the entire Ukrainian defense will collapse quickly. While the prospects for Ukraine holding the eastern and central parts of the city are now very limited, the experience of Pokrovsk and Myrnograd suggests that Ukrainian forces will continue resisting in the city's westernmost districts in order to delay the battle for Druszkivka, the most obvious next Russian objective after Konstantinivka. Druszkivka shields Kramatorsk and Słowiańsk from the south, and without taking it, Russia will not be able to begin any serious operation aimed at capturing those two cities. On the northern bank of the Donets, along the Liman direction, the situation is more ambiguous. On the one hand, Russian forces continue infiltrating the city from the east through forested areas, repeating the dispersed infantry tactics discussed earlier. As a result, Russia maintains some presence in the eastern part of the city, at times reaching even its center. On the other hand, north of Liman, Ukrainian forces are conducting offensive operations of their own. In near total media silence, Ukraine has been attacking along the sector from Dobryshewe to Katerynivka, achieving success and retaking at least the villages of Karpivka and Ridokub. According to still unconfirmed reports, these gains may be broader. The fact of Ukrainian operations and advances has also been confirmed by Russian sources. On the remaining sectors of the front, operations are auxiliary or fixing actions, with Russian pressure still continuing. The most active Russian operations are taking place around Kupiansk on the eastern bank of the Oskil, where Russian forces reached Kupiansk-Wuzlowy some time ago. The situation of Ukrainian soldiers on the eastern bank of the river remains extremely difficult because of supply problems, with provisions able to reach them only by the drone. At present, then, we are seeing two directions where Russia is developing offensive operations: west of Huliai Pole and inside Kostiantynivka. At the same time, Ukraine is conducting offensive actions of its own on three axes that could be described as inactive and of limited importance. But it was probably precisely those characteristics that made them attractive to the Ukrainian command. Guys, two short announcements before we move on. First, Serhiy, who translated GTBT Ukraine before enlisting in the Ukrainian Air Force, has set up a fundraiser to collect money for shelters for Ukraine's unmanned systems, helping keep them safe from Russian long-range drones. You can support the fundraiser via the link down below. Second, as you might already know, we continue publishing GTBT's short-format series called Essence. Basically, these are our episodes turned into 8-10-minute pills. And no, the voice actor is not AI. Pozdrawiam, Barney. Okay, let's move on. Ukraine struck in areas where Russian control was limited, urbanization was low, logistics were difficult for Russia, and Russian defenses were more thinly manned and less prepared. This allowed Ukrainian forces to make gains while committing only limited resources. So far, however, attempts to achieve deeper successes have failed, mainly because the Ukrainian forces assigned to these operations were themselves limited. The limited offensive potential of both sides is undoubtedly linked to fourth-generation problems now affecting both Ukraine and Russia. But this is not the only reason the situation has stabilized and the pace of advances and pressure along the front has declined. Because Ukraine's available manpower is limited, in recent months it has continued replacing soldiers with unmanned systems wherever possible. Kyiv developed the concept of the so-called drone wall, designed first to stop Russian pressure on the front and then to multiply enemy losses. The problem is that nothing happens in a vacuum. Processes pioneered by Ukraine were quickly adapted and copied by Russia. As a result, drones were responsible for an ever-growing share of frontline activity. They now inflict the overwhelming majority of losses on the enemy. The mass presence of drones in the sky has led both sides to almost completely abandon the use of vehicles in the zero line. This is also reflected in the statistics, which show that in recent months the number of reported destroyed vehicles, including tanks, has now fallen almost to zero. This does not mean Russia has run out of tanks. It means that using them under current battlefield conditions largely makes no sense. Every attempt this year to launch an attack with armored or mechanized columns has ended in complete failure and destruction. Drones were central to this because even when they are not the main strike weapon used to disable vehicles, they provided reconnaissance and detected movement, while it was still in the enemy rear. For this reason, both Russia and Ukraine now conduct operations in the combat zone with individual soldiers who infiltrate positions that are not held by larger numbers of defenders. Concentrating troops would immediately attract drones, artillery fire, or airstrikes. At the same time, battles of similar intensity are being fought constantly in the sky. where drone operators hunt enemy machines in order to support and often simply enable the actions of soldiers on the ground. Recent months have also seen both sides acquire the ability to use FPV drones against targets 100 to 150 kilometers from the front line. This trend was initiated by Ukraine, which began launching increasingly intensive attacks on targets in occupied Donetsk and Mariupol, as well as on Russia's main rear area supply routes. It was quickly copied by Russia, although it should be stressed that, for now, the scale of Russian attacks remains significantly smaller than the operations conducted by Ukrainian drone operators. The main targets include supply depots, energy infrastructure, air defense and radar systems, but also vehicles transporting soldiers, ammunition or fuel. Ukraine's deep strike campaign is not showing signs of slowing down. On the contrary, it is clearly intensifying. The key targets attacked by Ukraine are the bridges linking the Crimean Peninsula with Kherson Oblast. In recent days, the bridges at Hanichesk, Chonhar and Armiansk have been seriously damaged several times, with traffic temporarily suspended. Ukraine's declared objective is to fully isolate Crimea. If pressure is maintained and the number of attacks on crossings increases, this goal could be achieved to a significant degree, and the effects would likely be felt on the front fairly quickly. In theory, this would create an ideal situation for Ukraine to try to seize the initiative, but given its own significant manpower shortages, that scenario may not necessarily materialize. As usual, let's also look at the broader picture of the main, medium and long-range strikes over the past 3 weeks, illustrated on the map. On May 22nd, Starobilsk was hit, and according to Ukraine, the target was a drone command unit, according to Russia, a dormitory. That same night, a terminal in Novorossiysk was also struck. May 23rd brought an attack on the AKM chemical plant in Perm Krai. 2 days later, Ukrainian forces struck the refinery in Yaroslav, and on May 27th, the Tuapse refinery. During the night of May 28th-29th, Alpha drones hit the FSB Electronic Intelligence Center near Temryuk, the gas terminal at the port of Temryuk, and the Yaroslav Free pumping station. 3 oil tanks burned across the area of roughly 5,000 square meters. On May 30th, Ukraine damaged a tanker and refinery port infrastructure in Taganrog, and also struck an oil depot in Armavir. 2 days later, drones hit the refinery in Saratov, the Lazarevo pumping station in Kirov Oblast, and a fuel depot in Matveyev Kurgan. Russia claimed it had shot down 216 drones. On June 3rd, Ukraine struck St. Petersburg. Drones attacked the city's oil terminal and a warship in dry dock in Kronstadt, the corvette Boyki. All of this happened during Russia's Davos, the St. Petersburg International Economic Forum. On June 7th, the already mentioned campaign to isolate Crimea intensified. Ukrainian units struck the Chonhar bridge, linking Crimea with occupied southern Ukraine. According to the Ukrainian side, the goal was to cut the flow of troops, ammunition and fuel from Crimea toward the Huryai Pole direction. 2 days later, the same bridge was hit again. On June 10th, Ukraine struck the port in occupied Mariupol, and at the same night, FP-5 Flamingo missiles hit the Vnir Progress plant, an attack captured on video. June 11th brought strikes on the Apfitsky refinery, as well as further smaller attacks on Crimea, mainly against bridges and crossings between occupied Kherson Oblast and Crimea. The Moscow Times, citing occupation authorities, reported damage to several bridges near the North Crimean Canal, Preobrazhevka, Myrne, the Perekop-Armiansk route, and the Stavki area. On June 12, Ukraine struck the Taneko and Taiv refineries in Nizhnekamsk, as well as Tolyatti Kauchuk synthetic rubber plant in Samara Oblast, whose products are used in the production of solid rocket fuel. A day later, the Taman Neftgaz terminal was reportedly hit. On June 14th, Zelensky spoke of a strike on a fuel facility in Yaroslav Oblast and the Azot chemical plant in Tula Oblast. 2 days later, drones were again flying over Moscow. One of them damaged the facility at the Kapotnia refinery. That same day, drone debris caused a fire at a fuel depot in Plutavskaya in Krasnodar Krai. For balance, it should be noted that during the same period, more than 6,200 drones and over 250 missiles struck Ukraine, an average of roughly 250 drones and 10 missiles per day. And let's not forget that in the background, the prospect of a thaw in US-Iranian relations is emerging. Bad news for the Kremlin. Meanwhile, the European Union is moving ahead with its 21st sanctions package and has expanded its sanctions list to include new individuals and entities. The next package will once again focus mainly on banks, cryptocurrencies, and energy. And the war, now passing one grim milestone after another, still goes on.